Welcome to Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana basketball news and discussion, brought to you by the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. I'm your host, Jared Morris. Join me live at assemblycall.com every Thursday night and immediately following every IU game for our live IU postgame show. And visit InsideTheHall.com for complete coverage of IU basketball and to join the discussion in the Inside the Hall Premium Forum. All right, Alex, we are recording this on Friday morning, one short night of rest after Indiana defeated Iowa to stop their four-game losing skid. I find it interesting that over the last 6 games, Indiana has played 6 teams ranked between 9th and 21st in the country in KenPom right now, so a brutal stretch of the schedule. Indiana beat the highest ranked of those teams, Michigan State, at home, and they bookended it with a win over the lowest ranked of those teams, Iowa, at home, obviously dropping 2 road games and 2 home games in between. We definitely want to kind of take a big picture look at where the Hoosiers are right now, but let's reflect a little bit on the game from last night. You were there in person. Besides Devonte Green just going supernova with the shooting, what stood out to you from Indiana's performance?
Well, I wrote about this in 5 takeaways, and I don't know if this was by design. I kind of think it was from an Indiana perspective. It seemed like they were content with just kind of letting Luka Garza get his, with an emphasis on making sure that Joe Wieskamp and CJ Frederick, when he was in for I think 11 minutes, didn't score. Unfortunate that he got hurt. I mean, those 2 guys, I feel like Iowa, if they're going to be their best, Garza's playing really well, but he's also getting the other guys involved. And I think when you send help at Garza, that's when those 2 guys are capable of getting going. So Indiana just really tried to play straight up. He went for 38, but nobody else really killed him. And so I thought that was actually a pretty good strategy. You look at his game log, Garza's had some really good games and some losses. So I don't know that there's a direct correlation between him going off and Iowa winning. He's been pretty consistent in terms of his production. He's been going wild basically against everybody. So I like that they put an emphasis on trying to slow other guys down. And the other thing, for as good as Garza was, Indiana, I mean, look at Race Thompson and Trace Jackson Davis. They were really good in the front court from an offensive perspective. They didn't necessarily cancel out what Luka did, but they took the ball right back at him. And I think those 2 combined for 27 points. That's a pretty good night at the office for Indiana's front court. I mean, Joey Brink obviously didn't have a good game. Difficult matchup for him, I think, trying to stay with Garza. Jerod Davis, gave some good minutes at times, but I was just impressed more or less with the bounce back. I've been trying to wrap my mind around the fact that Indiana had 50 former players, Bob Knight and Purdue and Jared Morris in Assembly Hall on Saturday afternoon and didn't show up for the game. So it's like after you witness something like that, and Jared, you were sitting basically directly across the floor and to the side from where I was watching that up close. You just didn't get the sense that Indiana was even into the game. It was like they just showed up and played like they didn't really care whether or not what they won or lost the game. You can't have that mindset against any team in this league. And so I was impressed last night with the bounce back and the response. I think more or less anything though for fans what I'm hearing is that they're frustrated that at this point in year 3, back half of the Big Ten schedule, that they're still having to wonder on a game-to-game basis what this team's mentality is going to be. And I think we're going to learn a lot about what this team's mentality is coming up on the road. I mean, they've not been competitive in most road games. I mean, they haven't lost by 30 or anything like that, but they haven't been in the game really recently on the road. Penn State, Ohio State, those are losses that you just look at and say, well, Indiana was, they were somewhat respectable in terms of the final score, but if you watch the game, they weren't really in the game. So I'm more interested to see how this carries over, if it does at all, or if it's more of the same when they go to Michigan on Sunday.
Yeah, I want to go back to one thing that you talked about, because I think it's easy for it to get lost on a night when, Devonte goes for 27 points, Indiana scores 89, and you give up 77 to Iowa. You might not think, wow, that was a really good defensive performance. But the more that I've thought about the game, the more I'm impressed with the way Indiana played defense. They gave up 77 points, but it was 1 point per possession. And, in a normal game, you want to keep a team under 1 point per possession, but this is the third best offense in the country. And this is a team that can really hurt you in a lot of ways. And obviously Frederick not being out, that didn't help them. And they're struggling with some depth issues. But, for the most part, Indiana's defense on Wieskamp, not letting Toussaint really do anything. I thought that to your point, I thought Trace and Race and Duran really battled defensively. And sometimes Luka Garza just made a great play. And it's like, man, they battled for position. They were there. He's just a little bit taller and a little bit more skilled. And they made a tough shot. You tip your cap. That guy's a phenomenal offensive player. So he can score against good defense. And so I thought Trace played a phenomenal, maybe not phenomenal, but a really good defensive game despite the final numbers. But one of the real stories to me was how the guards and the wings really locked up Iowa's guys and made it difficult for them to get going, because that's something where Indiana's been really leaky. And so the combination of what I thought was a smart strategy and then good defensive execution from Indiana, there's a lot of things that Indiana needs to take from this game on the road if they're going to win. Getting back to crashing the glass. Indiana was 16 offensive rebounds. That was good. Forcing turnovers, making shots. Like, all of these things are going to need to do to win road games. But I really think that kind of defensive effort, attention to detail, and ability, especially on the wings and guarding the ball, if they can do that, that will keep them in some of these games. Because that, to me, has been one of the biggest issues when things have gone bad defensively. I feel like that's been one of the first things to go. And it just allows the other team to be too comfortable. And last night, Iowa wasn't comfortable. They just happen to have a guy who can make shots when he's uncomfortable.
Yeah, Garza is, watching him up close, he's tremendous offensively. He's as good as advertised. I'm quite frankly, I'm shocked at how good he is based on where he was last year and the season before. I remember even watching film on him in high school because Indiana recruited him a little bit, and kind of, I don't know how hard they were actually involved in his recruitment, but I remember just seeing him then and thinking, yeah, he's a big body, he might develop into something. But I never had him as a guy that was going to come into Assembly Hall and drop 38. So no. that was quite a performance. But yeah, they battled, they competed, and I agree with you. The guards made things difficult. I think that sequence in the second half where Jerome got that technical, I think was a direct result of how frustrated Wieskamp was. If you watched the play before, Wieskamp scored, I think, on Jerome and said something.
Yeah.
And then they were running back, and then it was like Connor McCaffrey got involved, and it was Iowa, I think, kind of trying to light a fire in the game. And it was basically they were talking because they were so frustrated at how well Indiana was defending them. So, and the thing about the 77 points is it's good that you bring up the perspective of the points per possession. It was a 77 possession game. Iowa's not a team that's going to get you into one of those half court, knock down, drag it out games. They're going to get shots up. They're going to get up and down the court. And Iowa is such a interesting program to look at just from the numbers perspective. Mm-hmm. They're a team, like, if you're a month from now and you're going to fill out your bracket, like, you're not trusting them to win a game or two, right? There's no way that you can trust a team that consistently is this bad defensively. I think I wrote today this will be the fourth straight year they're 10th or worst in points per possession allowed in Big Ten play. That's just not going to get it done in the tournament. So as fun as they're a fun team to watch every year, I feel like, in the regular season. I remember that year they were like number 5 or something. They came to Assembly Hall, and that was like the beginning of their annual February, whatever you want to call it.
Franuary fade.
Yeah, there you go. But yeah, they're fun to watch offensively, but they're just so bad defensively. It's like, that's the whole, I mentioned before this, I wanted to talk about Garza in terms of just his standing and National Player of the Year and Big Ten Player of the Year. It's like he got 38, but like I said, the two guys that he was primarily guarding got 27 or 30 total. So to me, that's basketball is a two-way game, and he's as good as he is offensively. He's almost as bad defensively. So,
yeah, I mean, he ate Joey Brunk's lunch just because of his body and his height. You know, Joey just couldn't get anything going, and we know that there's some matchups that just aren't good for Joey, and that was one of them. You know, Garza obviously could do a lot of things to us on the offensive end because of his height, because of his skill, but he had no chance of, you know, sticking with Trace Jackson Davis on the offensive glass or in transition or running with Race Thompson. And it was good to see Indiana, you know, look, you've got a disadvantage on this end, and you know this guy's going to score points. You got to take advantage of what you have on the other end, and that was athleticism and just, you know, hustle and ability to move. Not that Garza doesn't hustle, but he just, even when he plays hard, he just does it slowly, you know? So that was the advantage Indiana had, and they were able to take advantage of it. So
I was also pretty shocked that Indiana kind of beat Iowa at their own game in terms of all the threes they made. I mean, a big part of that was Devonte making 7, but I kind of felt like an idiot in hindsight when I wrote in the preview that Indiana couldn't afford to kind of start matching Iowa or get into a 3-point shooting contest, and that's exactly what they did.
I mean, in your defense, again, it's not based on the evidence.
It's not a sustainable formula. That's why every time they have a performance at home like this, I'm looking at what happens next, right? They did this against Florida State, and then they went to Wisconsin and were completely not competitive.
Annihilated.
So they have this, and now they go into a situation where they only have 2 days to turn around at Michigan. Michigan's playing a lot better now. They have Isaiah Livers back. So I'm more looking for not necessarily do they win the game, but are they in the game, right? I mean, are they how do they compete? How do they come out? What's this kind of the general vibe around the team? And I think a lot of it starts with Devonte. I mean, you watched that press conference last night after the game. It was like 75% questions to Archie about Devonte. Like, how do you kind of bottle this up and carry it over? And Archie just kind of looked as perplexed as ever. He's in his 3rd year of coaching Devonte, and I don't think he's got it figured out. So that's the other thing about this team is that they're almost at the mercy of a guy who just you can't count on with any to be consistent on a game-to-game basis. And you know, we're down to the final month here, so he hasn't done it yet. So it'd be hard to predict that he's going to show some consistency, but if he could, it would be absolutely big for this team.
He did do it at the end of last year. I mean, if he can bottle what he had at the end of last year and kind of play like that down the stretch, that would be huge. But yeah, I mean, it is at the point, you know, it does kind of feel like a roulette wheel every game. And when it's good, boy, it can be really good. And you just try to capitalize on those times when it's good. But you gotta ride the waves a little bit. Hey, we'll get back to talking IU hoops here in just a second. Going to talk about Rob Phinisee next. But first, I want to talk about our friends from Home Field Apparel. You know, Connor and the guys at Home Field Apparel, they're just awesome dudes. You know, we were up there last weekend, had our event at Switchyard after the IU-Purdue game. Connor was there. He brought shirts down, handed them out to people who were there. He and the Home Field team, they've been so supportive of us at the Assembly Call and podcast on the Brink. You know, our relationship with them now going over 4 years. And it's easy to want to support people like that are supportive of us, they're supportive of IU sports. You know, they're IU grads, they're based in Indianapolis. And, you know, so that alone makes you want to go support Home Field Apparel. But, you know, at the end of the day, this is something you're going to wear. This is clothing. So the most important reasons to go to homefieldapparel.com is because their stuff is great. You know, and the two most important characteristics are the comfort and just how unique the logos are. You know, comfort, number one, if it's something you're going to wear, whether it's a t-shirt or a long sleeve tee or a hoodie or a crew neck, whatever, you want it to feel good and you want it to fit right. And all of their stuff does that. And importantly, you don't just want it to fit well and feel good the first time you wear it. You want to be able to wash it, and you want it to feel good, you know, for many, many times thereafter. And that's the great part about the material that they use. And then, you know, from a uniqueness perspective, their whole thing is they go back and pull old logos and brand marks and mascots from, you know, the olden days from schools and bring them back and give them a new life and give you the opportunity to make kind of a unique statement about your fandom. You know, so whether it's the Bison logo, whether it's the old school basketball shoes logo, some of the unique stuff they've done with the Christian Watford t-shirt, they've just got all this really cool, unique stuff so that whether you're shopping for yourself, whether you're shopping for a gift, whatever it is, you can find stuff that just looks really cool and is on comfortable material, and you're supporting a great company in the process. So use our promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, when you go to homefieldapparel.com. You will get 20% off your entire order. That's promo code BRINK, At homefieldapparel.com, get the most comfortable and unique IU apparel that you will find anywhere. Home field, wear one for the team. And now, back to our conversation about IU basketball, leading off with some talk about Rob Phinisee. I want to talk about my biggest concern coming out of the game. On a night, obviously, when so many things went well. But I continue to be concerned about Rob Phinisee offensively. I thought defensively he was really good, but watching him in person against Purdue and then watching him last night, my impression of him offensively right now is there's basically one thing that he's doing in rhythm and confidently, and that is catch and shoot three-pointers. When the ball goes inside out, again, I need to go look at the synergy numbers, but I have to think he's shooting like 50% on those this year. Like I always think they're going in. It's rhythm, and it's like he's playing with instinct, and he plays like that defensively. But there were so many times last night, and it was in the Purdue game too, where Archie is imploring him to push the ball, like yelling and even getting mad at him at certain points. And and especially in the half-court offense, and I get maybe part of it is just that the offense gets bogged down and there's not enough spacing and all these things. He just doesn't look comfortable. He looks tentative to me. And it has been a storyline for a while. I know people have talked about the injury and those kinds of things. It doesn't seem like the physical ailments are really hurting him anymore. Could it be the practice time that he missed trying to get his rhythm back? I don't know. But I'm curious if you see the same thing, if maybe, he's playing better on that end than I think maybe he is, and what kind of needs to happen for him to become that more dynamic playmaker that we saw, for example, last year against Illinois and last year in the first half of the season when he was really going. Because I don't feel like we've really seen that guy this year outside of a couple short spurts.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest problem right now with him is the turnovers, right? I mean, look at the turnover percentage. He was pretty good in that regard last year from a freshman perspective. 11.8 turnover percentage in conference play last year, which is 14th best in the league.
Yeah,
he's at 27%.
And so I'm glad you brought that up because that's where he feels tentative to me. It's like the one pass he had on the sideline to Trace Jackson Davis, where he threw him into a terrible position. It was a horrible decision and a really tentative pass, and that's just not the guy that I remember from times last year.
Yeah, he had 5 turnovers last night. He's had a turnover in every game he's played in all season. That's hard to believe. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the one thing I do notice is like there's a couple times last night he made a mistake and like they instantly pulled him out.
Yeah.
Is he afraid to mess up, and so that's kind of forcing him to overcompensate for the fact that he knows if he does screw up, he's coming out of the game. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't think we'll ever hear whether or not he's completely 100% healthy. I don't think we're going to hear excuses for whether it's the missed practice time or there's something else going on. But at this point of the season, he's the starting point guard. They're ultimately only going to probably go as far as he's able to lead them. And right now, I think you make some good points. The best that he's looked offensively is on the catch and shoot. He doesn't necessarily look great going to the basket and finishing. He's shooting 38.8% on twos in Big Ten. He's shooting better on threes than he is twos in Big Ten play, that's pretty.
Sounds
pretty
like my high
do.
School career.
So, yeah, we'll see. He's going to have a huge challenge on Sunday, right? I mean, there's no better guy in the league to test yourself where you are mentally than Xavier Simpson, because that guy will absolutely harass you if you're not ready to go from a mental perspective. Just one of the best defenders in the league, and just a guy who can ultimately control a game with his defense and the way he plays. So Rob's going to have to play much better than he did last night, and quite frankly, than he has recently. If Indiana's going to have a chance to go up there and win, but yeah, it's Jared. Jared? When do we get to the point like when you ask like, is Rob Phinisee the future at point guard for Indiana? Are we there yet, or like is it? Because it's been like. Last year he was really good, I thought, and then this year there was a lot of expectations for him. And I'm not saying that he's been a complete bust this season, but I think there's been a regression in terms of what expected out of him. When do you in evaluating him, if you're the coaching staff, when do you say we need to go get another point guard for next year so we have somebody else if this doesn't work out? I mean, do you still see him as the guy at that spot moving forward after the season for IU?
I don't think those things need to be mutually exclusive. I think even if you felt good about Rob, you would still want to go get another point guard because we need another capable ball handler. Like it's not a good role for Al to have to be thrust into. It doesn't allow him to play to his strengths. Neither Armand, I don't think. So getting another point guard, another lead ball handler would be good either way. But I do think we're at the point where, he hasn't taken that step forward that we all expected, and that based on the roster construction, he needed to. Now, there have been good things. His shooting is better. Defensively, he's still forcing turnovers, and, he's been really solid defensively. So some of those things are good. But in terms of just leading the half-court offense, he has struggled and been inconsistent and seemed tentative. And, boy, if your point guard is tentative, that's going to cascade down to the rest of the guys. Last night when you get Devonte Green just blowing the doors open, making threes, it makes everybody feel better. But a lot of times the offense plays how Rob is, and that's really more the usual circumstance as opposed to last night. And so I think they just, they need a steadier hand there. And I am not convinced that it can't be him. I mean, a lot of guys, they come through as juniors and seniors and really mature. And he seems to have the kind of mentality that could do that, and if there is anything to, him missing so much practice in the offseason to just getting him off on the wrong foot, then maybe that's something that can take care of itself next year. But I do think it's fair to kind of wonder if he's going to be the guy that we all thought he was going to be. And that's definitely something that I think is going to have to reverse itself by the end of this year and by next year for this team to get where we want it to go. But either way, get guards. Go find more guards. Go find more playmakers.
I mean, I guess I'm just kind of shocked that we're even having this conversation because I thought that he was going to be – maybe I was too high on him coming out of high school, but I thought he was going to be rock solid for 4 years, and it just hasn't materialized at this point. So I'm kind of actually surprised that we're even having the conversation. And I'm still optimistic that he turns a corner. I just think there's something there with him every time, going back to just watching him in high school, like even as a sophomore in the state championship game, I'm like, this guy knows how to play basketball. And that's the puzzling part to me is his tentativeness and his I don't know if it's an unwillingness, but it doesn't seem like he's been able to forcibly take the reins of this team and say, like, I'm going to run this team and this team's going to get confidence from me. And I saw that from him in high school, and I saw that from him at times last year as a freshman, and I'm not seeing it right now. And I just wonder what's missing. Well,
maybe that is something, that he will grow into. It's got to be a little bit difficult for a guy to come in with a lot of upperclassmen and just assume that. So maybe as he becomes an upperclassman, that'll be more natural. And I think this is also where it's fair to wonder about, the job that Archie Miller has done with him. If a guy is feeling uncomfortable in the offense, then at some point the guy who's the architect of the offense and the guy who played point guard, and who's talked before about that relationship between coach and point guard being really important, something just seems off there. Like, I don't think it's a personality conflict between those guys, like maybe where it could be with Devonte and Archie Miller. They seem to, I think, see basketball the same way, but something's just a little bit off. And I think, that's where maybe the staff has to challenge themselves more to find ways to put him in a position to be successful. And I'm sure the answer lies somewhere in the middle. It's probably both of those things. But, at some point, if the guys aren't comfortable in the system, then maybe there need to be some tweaks, or something done on that end too. I don't have the answers, obviously, but it's just, I think it's something worth considering. It's easy. You watch the guys play, and it's easy to just kind of criticize them and what's going on with them. But this is where good coaching can also sometimes come in and lift that guy up and give him the confidence that he needs if he doesn't have it yet. I'm not saying that they're not trying. I'm sure they're trying everything, but something just hasn't clicked yet. And hopefully it does.
Right. Yeah.
So let's get back to Luka Garza, because you wanted to talk about him kind of as you got into a Twitter conversation with kind of this narrative about Luka Garza as, a Big Ten Player of the Year candidate, All-America candidate. His scoring numbers are obviously there. Are you buying Luka Garza as a potential Conference Player of the Year?
I mean, he's in the discussion. I thought Archie was a little strong in his comments where he's not only said before the game but after the game that he was National Player of the Year in his mind. I'm just thinking to myself, Archie
talks up opponents a lot.
if he was National Player of the Year, has there ever been a bigger drop off from a National Player of the Year on a year-to-year basis from Zion Williamson to Luka Garza? Because I don't think there has. And like, I respect Luka Garza. Like, I love watching him play basketball. He plays hard. He literally came out of the game, I think, last night for like 20 seconds. It was at the end of the first half. They took him out. He didn't foul, which I'm sure some of his defenders on Twitter are going to tell me that one of the reasons he's not as good defensively is because he can't afford to take any chances or foul. But he did have, 3 or 4 blocks in the game. He also had a bunch of turnovers that just were ridiculous travels where he just completely looked off balance. It's like he's playing so hard that sometimes he just speed starts going faster than his body will allow, and he just travels. But yeah, I mean, he's awesome to watch, and I think he's a great offensive player. I just think my whole point was, and I'm not saying he doesn't deserve to be first team All Big Ten. I'm not saying he doesn't deserve to be in the mix for Big Ten Player of the Year, but I think we need to pump the brakes on National Player of the Year. And I think, and we were talking about this before, and your opinion may be a little bit different than mine. Player of the Year in the conference, I think there has to be some correlation between how your team finishes and the player in terms of how they perform. I mean, if Iowa goes on a losing streak now and doesn't finish, say they finish 7th or 8th in the Big Ten, I don't know how you reward that over a guy like potentially Jalen Smith, who Maryland's leading the league right now, and there's a lot of other guys who have had really good years. Io has played really good for Illinois. Let's see how it all shakes out in the end in terms of the standings. But I don't think it's like a cut and dry conversation that he should be Big Ten Player of the Year. That was my only point. I want to see where everything shakes out, and I also want to just say that his numbers are great offensively, but like last night was a perfect example. I mean, the guys that he was guarding also had really good nights. So it was like, okay, he got 38, but who was he guarding primarily? Was it Race Thompson and Trace for good parts of the night? I mean, those guys combined for 27 or 30 points. So it wasn't like he was such an overwhelming presence that he canceled out the other man that he was guarding.
So, like the James Blackman Jr. of big men.
I mean, you said it, not me, but
I mean, a devastating offensive force, but gives it up on the other end. I mean, look, you got to score points, and so he is obviously putting a lot more on the table than he's taking off. The other part of this argument is there's got to be some people out there that are contributing as much as him. And I think in the Big Ten you have that. I think Jalen Smith is a guy you can talk about. Daniel Oturu is a guy that you can talk about. Obviously, Cassius Winston's going to be in there. Ayo Dosunmu, you talked about him. Lamar Stevens is clearly having a big impact. I don't think that just because a guy, his team places 7th or 8th in the Big Ten, that it's disqualifying for him being Big Ten Player of the Year. Because if you removed him, would they be in the cellar? Context matters, I think it's part of the equation, but not the entire thing. But I agree. I think he's in the mix, but I like my Players of the Year to have a little bit more two-way flavor. And he's, as devastating as you're going to find offensively, that production is phenomenal. But, especially for a team like Iowa that struggles so much defensively, that's definitely part of the case against him, and I think it's a valid one.
Yeah.
So, okay, I want to ask you about something, because last night there was a question in the post-game press conference from Greg Doyle that people got a little bit upset by. Some people in our chat were talking about it, and I saw some people getting upset by it, and so I was kind of primed to think that it was a really bad question when I went and watched it. And if you don't know the context, Greg Doyle from the Indianapolis Star asked Devonte Green essentially why he's so inconsistent, and he phrased it in kind of this weird way. He said, where do you go? And Devonte didn't quite understand, asked him to elaborate, and Greg basically threw it back at him and said, well, that's what I want you to elaborate on. You're an NBA offensive talent. Where do you go when you're really struggling? And a lot of people were bothered by this, and I suppose I can see why, but I wasn't. I watched it and didn't really understand kind of what the big deal was. I thought it was an uncomfortable question at the time, but a fair one, certainly. So maybe you want to talk about that real quick, just because it was kind of an interesting narrative that came out of the post game.
Yeah, I mean, I've posted my thoughts on Twitter, and I've had a lot of people come back at me, and obviously I'm happy to engage in conversation when somebody's going to respond with respect or actually want to have a dialogue. But if people are just saying that's a clown thing to say or whatever, it's like, okay,
Clown question, bro.
Right. I mean, it's like, okay, that's we're advancing the conversation by saying things like that. But I mean, do I think maybe that in hindsight there was a better way to word the question? Maybe. The problem I had was, and I think you may have mentioned this on Twitter when you responded to somebody, Jerod, but it's like, all right, people are complaining that he asked this question after a really good game. Well, when else would you like him to ask the question? Because when Devonte Green inevitably scores 0 points or 2 points or 3 points, which Greg mentioned, they're not going to bring him into the post-game press conference. So we can't ask the question then. And I think it's a relevant storyline to this team because when they're at their best, Devonte is doing what he did last night. Florida State game, example. Last night, example. There's been some other games where he's played really well and Indiana's won and played well. When he doesn't show up, they don't play as well or they don't have the ceiling that they have. And so he was basically trying to figure out from Devonte's perspective, why does this happen? And I thought the answer from Devonte was pretty telling. All he could really muster up was, I'm inconsistent. And that really doesn't tell us anything. Like, why are you inconsistent? Why are you? And maybe it's just the fact that he's just not capable of playing that way on a night in, night out basis. I mean, that's the most logical conclusion, right, Jerod? I mean, this is, he can play that way at his best, but that's not who he is on a game to game basis. And that's fine. I mean, but I just don't understand the outrage of getting mad over that question. I thought it was perfectly fair. It's not like the guy's in his first year of college basketball. He's a senior. He's been kind of through this. He's obviously a captain of the team. He's one of the more important guys on the roster. He's a guy that Archie Miller's kind of openly talked about the give and take that he's had to do with him over the course of his career and trying to figure out the ways to get the most out of him. And so I think that he was just trying to get into the psychology of that, and he didn't get much out of the answer. But I thought, I mean, it was to me, it was a pretty telling exchange. I mean, I would have liked to have heard a little bit more than just I'm inconsistent. I don't like that doesn't tell us anything.
No, and I don't fault Devonte for not having a great articulation of that. Like, it's not.
But it has to be something he's thought about, though, right, Jerod?
I mean, probably, but in the moment, taken a little bit off guard, look, I don't think it was a bad question to ask. An uncomfortable question doesn't mean it's unfair, doesn't mean it's underhanded, but you're going to ask the question, you're going to get, and you have to take the answer that you get. I would have liked to get more, but, to me, ideally, that's the kind of question after a game you can go, sit next to a guy at his bench, or at his locker, maybe warm him up a little bit, and then, ask him that question. Or, shoot, go to Buffalo's over some wings. I would love to do that with Devonte and be like, it's so magnificent when you play like that. Like, do you have any hypothesis for why you struggle, to be consistent? Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. Like, maybe Devonte's answer is, I reject the premise of your question and I'm not inconsistent. Or, there's 1,000 different things that it could be. So I didn't have a problem with that. And I'm sure Greg probably would have liked to ask it in a different situation, but he's not going to get him in that environment.
And his follow-up, like people were taking it as like he was insulting the guy. In his follow-up, he said, "You're an NBA talent offensively." That's not an insult. That's like saying, "Hey, I'm just trying to figure out the psychology behind why you can be this and why you can also be that." I mean, to me, the whole story is like there's no middle ground. It's like he's either great or he's non-existent to the point where you have to bench him the final 10 minutes against Northwestern. I mean, that's just think that's the thing.
No,
like
it's a prevailing story.
It's hard to wrap your brain around that. I mean, how can a guy take down a team like Florida State that's going to be a top 2 or 3 seed in the NCAA tournament, and you can't afford to have them on the floor at home against Northwestern? I mean, that's just, to me, that's the whole thing, and I think that's what Greg was trying to uncover, and maybe we never uncover it. Maybe it's the thing that when we look back on the season, we say, that what really held this team back was it didn't have great guard play. And a big part of that was Devonte was never kind of really able to bottle up the good things that he was able to do and make them a consistent part of his output. And so, I mean, I just didn't understand the outrage over the question. I thought it was fair. Maybe he didn't, I mean, I wouldn't expect him to like the question, but
that doesn't,
it's not really Greg's job or any of our jobs to, like, when you ask a question, it's not, we shouldn't only ask questions that people like to be asked. I mean, we're trying to tell stories and figure things out and explain what's happening. And sometimes you have to ask questions that aren't comfortable.
Yeah. And then be willing to listen to the answer. It would have been the wrong time to ask a personal question, like to ask him about, his relationship with his dad or something like that.
Right.
There's no reason to ask something like that. It was a basketball question, though. So, and you wonder, I mean, Greg is not a guy that's around all the time, so seeing an unfamiliar face asking you a question, maybe that was part of the reason why, Devonte and Trace and Reyes. I think part of the issue is they all kind of looked weird when he asked the question. It kind of primed everybody watching the press conference to maybe think it was a bad question. I will say this. I didn't have a problem with the question. I actually disagree with the premise of the article Greg wrote about it, where he was basically talking about how, last night, Devonte got all of the attention, but, the guy who has been the rock for Indiana and who was terrific again was Trace Jackson Davis. And, saying basically, Indiana fans aren't appreciating him enough or don't recognize how great he is. Which I think if you're not around, and maybe you disagree with this, so that's why I'm presenting this. If you're not around all the time and you just come in when Devonte has a big game and is obviously going to be the storyline, it may look like that last night. But, I mean, on the postgame show last night, we said, look, Devonte was the most important player because of his threes, but Trace was the best player on the court for Indiana because of all the different things he did. And I feel like at least the Indiana fans I interact with are fully aware of how impactful he has been and how terrific he has been. So, to me, that seemed like a stretch and trying to kind of have a different take that I thought totally missed the mark. That was actually the thing I had a bigger problem with than the question. And, I like a lot of Greg's work, so I'm not, trying to criticize him and make it a value judgment on everything he does. We all swing and miss. To me, I thought that was a swing and a miss on the take from last night.
Yeah, I haven't read the column. I was obviously in Bloomington till 11:30 last night. I got home at 1:30. I got up at 6 in the morning with my kids. I wrote 5 takeaways, and then I got onto the podcast with you. So I haven't really read anything other than Twitter and sent out a couple tweets. But I think Trace Jackson Davis is arguably the most popular, most well-liked player on the team. I mean, he's a guy that I just wrote today. He's been their most consistent player. I mean, he's 6 of the last 7. I think he scored double figures. We talk about guys hitting a freshman wall. I don't see any signs of that happening with him. He's just a guy that shows up every game and plays hard, produces, and I think he's a guy that you build your program around for the long term. So, I didn't read what Greg wrote on that column, but I just felt compelled based on a couple of people sent me some tweets and stuff that people were saying in response to him last night. It was just like, I just thought it was a little bit over the top. And, it's I think a lot of times, like, we're quick to, like, jump on people and criticize them in the media if they don't like something, and that they do. And I've been guilty of that, but also it's also important, I think, like, to understand the context of, I think, what he was trying to do. And I don't think there was any malicious intent on his behalf that he was trying to do anything that was out of line. And so I felt it appropriate, just like I would do. I know Greg, and I'm not friends with him. I'm an acquaintance with him. I talk to him at games and say hi. But I don't like to see people attacked for something when I don't think that it's warranted. And in that situation, I just don't think that there was anything there that he was trying to do that was over the top. I mean, I've taken issue with, I remember when he first got the job at the Star and he came out firing on Green. I criticized him for things like that, but that was different. And I think this is just a situation where he's trying to me, that's the storyline of IU basketball right now is they're basically their season over the next month hangs in the balance of this guy and whether he can, and I don't mean this guy as in like random guy, Devonte Green. The season hangs in the balance of whether or not he can kind of string together a solid month of play here. Because if he can, they're a tournament team. And if he can't, they're probably not a tournament team. And so that to me is that was the whole premise of trying to figure out what's going on here.
Let me hit a couple of questions that we got from the forum real quick before we get out of here. One question from Watching Yogi at Yogi's is basically about Justin Smith. What were your thoughts on him last night, both in terms of how he played and just, attitude and body language? Because we know sometimes with him that's been a question mark. And he basically wants to know, like, do you think he's kind of misunderstood at times because of some of those questions?
I didn't even look at his line last night. Let's see. He was
the stats don't jump out at you, but it was the defense on Wieskamp really that was probably the most impactful part of the game from him.
Yeah, he was good. 7 rebounds, 1 turnover, 6 points. I mean,
I thought he really struggled to get going offensively early, and then in the second half, he got himself more involved.
Yeah, and then when Jerome things turned for the worse for Jerome, like it was more on Justin to step up. Played 32 minutes, like you said. I thought he frustrated Wieskamp for a good part of the night, and that goes back to what we talked about earlier, was that Indiana was going to let Luka Garza do his thing and try to stop the other guys, and Justin Smith was one of the reasons they stopped the other guys, so credit to him. I think Justin's pretty much the same in terms of his demeanor on a game-to-game basis. I think a lot of people wish he would be more vocal and assertive at times, but that just doesn't seem to be in his DNA and in terms of his vocal leadership. But I thought he was good last night.
I actually think the role that he played last night, I actually thought both he and Al Durham were able to slip into clothes that are more comfortable for them last night. Because when Devontae's scoring like that, and even when Rob's hitting shots, there's a lot less pressure on Al to be a huge contributor offensively, and he can be a role player, which is what Al should be. And I thought Al played really, really well last night. Like, I thought he was a big contributor, and same thing for Justin. Justin was 5th on the team in shots, taking 5. He only made 1 of them, but he got to the free throw line, did some work on the glass, played good defense. I think that's more where you want him to be ideally. I think when Al and Justin are having to take on a lot more of the offensive load, that's probably because Rob's not making shots and Devontae's not scoring, and you're not getting a guy like Race scoring. And so last night felt more like the roles guys should fall into. And you're always going to see a better performance and guys play more comfortable when they're in a role that's better suited to them. And that context is important to remember, because sometimes guys get thrust in, having to take 2 steps forward, and maybe they're only ready to take 1. And I feel like that's been part of the issue with Al this year. And so, look, a guy's got to perform in the role that he's in, and there's no excuses necessarily. But you see it on a night like tonight, it's like, oh yeah, that guy can be pretty darn effective when he's asked to do the things he's capable of. This roster just isn't constructed well enough for them to be able to do that on most nights. And I think that macro perspective can maybe help, fans be fair in their analysis of guys. And I've been guilty of it, but help us be more fair in our analysis of these guys on a game-to-game basis.
That's fair. I agree with you.
Another question was about substitution patterns. IU 133 wants to know if you have any insight as to if Archie or another assistant is in charge of the subbing patterns. He says it feels like the rotations are scripted and the coaching staff at times takes too long to notice who is playing well and should get the majority of the minutes during a game. Have you had issues with it? I would say at times I have, but last night I thought it was good. I mean, they realized that Joey Brunk wasn't going to play well. He only got 10 minutes. They put Deron Davis in there, I think, for some good spot minutes. Jerome Hunter, I didn't really think had it last night, and they didn't play him a lot. They give those minutes to Race. So I thought last night was actually one of the better examples of Archie deploying the playing time in the way that I was kind of seeing the game from my vantage point from the TV. It hasn't always been like that, but I thought last night was, and that's not to say that my vantage point is right. Obviously, he knows a lot more about it than I do, but everything seemed to make sense last night in terms of playing time.
Yeah, I didn't I mean,
and the question is more of a macro question, not just about last night.
I don't know necessarily how that works, or if it's changes on a game-to-game basis. I'm sure there's some type of plan behind it, but I think more. I mean, I would hope that it's a feel amongst the head coach and the assistant coaches as to which guys you ride. I mean, with Devonte, it's been clear that when he's hitting shots, they kind of try to unleash him into the game and get that barrage. And then when he starts, kind of making some plays that maybe aren't favorable to the team, they kind of pull back and sit him out. So I think it's pretty reactive. I mean, obviously you're not going to play guys 38, 39 minutes a game. Well, Frank McCaffrey did with Luka Garza last night, but
what choice did he have?
Right, exactly. But no, I don't. I mean, I don't know. It'd be an interesting question, but I don't think they're gonna I don't think Archie would say we have a script that we follow every game. I think he would just tell you that it's on a game to game basis in terms of feel and how guys are going. I would think, but yeah, I mean, there's been times this season where I've tweeted this is a weird lineup, this is a bad lineup, who's going to score in this lineup. I didn't feel that way at all last night. Maybe it was because Iowa's defense is so bad that it didn't matter who was on the court.
It does make it a little bit easier when you're playing an Iowa defense. One more question from Tom Jameson. How many of the 7 games remaining in the Big Ten regular season do you think IU has a good chance to win based on matchups, how everyone is playing, and or just your gut feelings? This is an interesting question.
Good chance to win. All the home games, I think they have a good chance to win. Do I think they'll win them all? I mean, I think they could. I don't know that I'd necessarily bet on it or predict it, but I mean, Penn State is good. They've played really well. I mean, do we really think Penn State's just going to go wild the rest of the month and just win every game? I don't necessarily think I trust that based on the track record with Pat Chambers. This is year 9. This is going to be the first time he makes the tournament. I mean, Archie's historically played really well against Penn State as IU's coach. I mean, they've got a winning record against Penn State, so I think that's a game they could win. The other 2 home games, I mean, I think they could definitely win those. I'm more interested to know if they can steal a road game, and I'm trying to think out of those 4. Is it 4 or 3? I got 3 left.
4. At Michigan, at Minnesota, at Purdue, at Illinois. Sandwiched around that Penn State game. Those are the next 5 games.
I don't think they're going to win at Purdue. I don't think they're going to win at Michigan.
I think Minnesota is the most winnable.
Minnesota. I don't necessarily think Illinois is impossible to win either. We'll see what's going on with Io, and if he's back, it sounds like he's not going to be out very long. But I mean, they've played well against Illinois too. He's lost once to them. I think it was his first season on the road there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Minnesota is the best chance for a win on the road. But yeah, I mean, if they win the home games, they're 9 Big Ten wins or 19 wins. They're probably in the tournament at that point. We'd have to get bracketologist Andy Bottoms to put his stamp of approval on that. But
that's been the general consensus. Get to 19.
Yeah. Get to 19. But yeah, they lost. They let's look at the home games they've lost. Arkansas, they collapsed at the end. Maryland, they collapsed at the end. Those are probably 2 games that you look back and say they should have won. Really, the only game where they've just kind of gotten beat wire to wire at home has been Purdue. And that's just a head scratcher. That's
a terrible performance.
I think if they only win 18 games and they're a 1 seed in the NIT, I think we're going to look back on that game and say that was. I mean, the Maryland one was bad too, but I just think the Purdue was such an opportunity. That was the most full this building's been. I know we didn't do a podcast after.
No, and the place was ready to explode. Just give us anything, and they gave nothing.
It didn't show up. Just didn't even show up. So
no,
we'll see. Really they win. They've got something to play for now that they beat Iowa. They win the rest of their home games. I think they're going to make it. So we'll see how they respond.
Yeah, I agree. They needed that big time. It just, it allows us all to exhale for about 48 hours. We'll see what Sunday brings.
Penn State, to me, is the toughest of those three.
For sure.
Don't you think?
And they've won 4 road games in a row. They just beat Purdue by 12 at Purdue. Wasn't it by 12? 8 or 12.
Yeah, they made a bunch of threes.
Yeah. So, ridiculous. but again, they're really good, but they're not unbeatable, so it's got to be ready.
Yep.
But with Indiana, as soon as you think you know what to expect, the one thing that we can kind of expect is this team has not played well on the road. And that, I think, is the most important thing over these next 2 games. Michigan and Minnesota, they're both winnable games. Like, these teams have holes, and there are advantages that Indiana can have against these 2 teams. But they have not even come close to being able to take advantage of that on the road. So that's
Michigan's already lost, 3 Big Ten home games?
Yeah, but that was without Livers. So, they're a different team with Livers, and that obviously makes a big difference. But I think if that, to me, is the big yard marker for success now. If they can go get one of these 2 games, then something's a little bit different in a good way with this team. If they just go and kind of lose both games, with a whimper, lose by 12, 16 points, it's like, all right, well, we just got to win our home games, and that's just what we are this year. But if this team is going to take the next step, I think winning one of these next 2 road games is that'll show us that they're ready to take a next step. A lot of things have to happen. Devonte needs to make shots. Rob's got to play better. Trace has to keep being Trace. Race and Race's impact is really important. Keeping him healthy. He had a big game against Michigan State, a big game against Iowa. He was hurt in between. They lost all 4 games in between. So they got to keep him healthy because he makes a difference.
Minnesota looks like the best opportunity because they've lost 3 or 4. They play Iowa next at home, and they're not a great offensive team. They're okay. They're 27th in adjusted offensive efficiency, but in Big Ten play, they're 8th. They're scoring a point per possession. They're the worst 3-point shooting team in the conference. So it probably means they're going to make 15 threes on Indiana, but
they did last year.
But yeah, I think that's the one. That's the one you have to look at and say it's the best chance to win a game. But yeah, they've not been great lately. They've won some home games. They beat Michigan, Penn State, Wisconsin at home, but they did lose about 18 at home to Michigan State. So we'll see. That's obviously a big game, and I don't know. It's funny that I write what to expect because I have really no idea what to expect. Until I see them beat like a decent team on the road, I'm not convinced that they're going to do it.
It's the hard part. We kind of know what to expect on the road right now. So I'm really looking for Indiana to flip the script and show us something a little bit different. Show us that they've turned some corner, taken a step, and hopefully that can start on Sunday. We will have you over at the Assembly Call with the postgame show. Alex will have all kinds of coverage at InsideTheHall.com, as he always does. And we'll have another episode of Podcast on the Brink next week, hopefully talking about a road win. That would be a nice, welcome change. One of these days. Go get some sleep, Bozich.
Yeah, it's too late in the day now to go back to sleep.
It is.
Although I may consider it for you for a couple hours. 5 hours. 5 hours is rough.
It's rough. I got to go rest my voice. It's been a lot of talking over the last 12 hours. All right, everybody. We will talk to you after the game. Talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Podcast on the Brink. We always appreciate you being here. Remember to join me and my co-hosts for more IU basketball talk at assemblycall.com and visit Alex over at insidethehall.com for complete coverage of Indiana basketball. If you want to support Podcast on the Brink, here is the single best way to do it. Tell anyone you know who loves IU hoops about us and suggest that they subscribe. Podcast on the Brink can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else podcasts are available. Tell your social media followers, email your friends, text your family members. For weekly discussion about IU basketball, they need to be subscribed to Podcast on the Brink. We'll talk to you next time. Go Hoosiers.